Hello again, everyone. Welcome to MustardHub Voices Behind the Build. In these fireside chats, I sit down with the people building, backing, and running better workplaces. I'm your host, Curtis Forbes. My guest today is Jocelyn King. Jocelyn is the CEO and founder of Virgil HR, a SaaS platform that helps HR professionals make compliant employment decisions in real time through an intelligent chatbot that delivers instant employment and labor law guidance. With a career dedicated to human resources, she has supported both high growth startups and public companies, building deep expertise across all areas of HR, including serving as the Vice President of North America Human Resources for Ocado Group and Vice President of Human Resources for Cybrary. Jocelyn is recognized for her ability to develop HR strategy, manage multi-state and global employee relations, and foster diverse, high-performing cultures. Her long-standing experience in technology sector has strengthened her understanding of how tech and HR intersect, enabling her to lead Virgil HR into the future of HR innovation. Happy to have you here on Behind the Build, Jocelyn. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Curtis.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've done everything. You're an HR thought leader. You are a tech founder. You're basically an expert in HR compliance and change management and tech readiness and so much more. How on earth did you get here? What did that career journey look like? Where did it even start?
Well, let's see. Straight out of college, I was recruited by Target. I had no clue what I wanted to do. I was a philosophy major, so didn't have a clue. And I didn't know very much about human resources, but I thought it was general enough in the business space. So I took the job, which I'm really grateful for because I learned a ton in my time there. They have a really incredible management training program, and I learned a lot and just really fell in love with HR. So after Target, I decided to shift into technology. And since then, have worked for technology companies the rest of my career and just moved my way up, always kind of in that generalist role. And I loved the generalist role because I was able to be a jack of all trades, master of none type thing. I could touch on every aspect of human resources, which is such a dynamic profession, and eventually moved into these leadership roles. And as I did that and throughout my journey, I was working with multi-state employers and always felt this pain point of having to comply with employment and labor laws, which I wanted to do, but there were so many and they were very complicated in a lot of cases and there were a lot of nuances. And so Google became my best friend and my worst enemy, as I didn't know, is this article the most up to date, or is it even accurate for that matter? Maybe you're talking to lawyers, but there isn't a big budget to be doing that on a regular basis. And I thought, there's got to be a better way for HR. And I figured automation and AI would be able to accomplish that. And so, yeah, I started Virgil about 4 years ago.
That's really cool. I'm just curious. You had mentioned that you sort of when you transitioned into the tech space, was that intentional? Were you recruited in that direction? Did you have an epiphany one day and decide that you wanted to do things sort of more on that technical side?
Honestly, I learned a lot about employee relations in my
Yeah.
previous role, and there are just some industries that are more complicated than others, and tech is not as complicated. So I felt like that was probably a better fit because uh, sometimes those types of investigations can be really draining on you.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet. So it all kind of brings us to today to Virgil HR. Um, what were the circumstances behind sort of the genesis of that company? What drove you to build that?
Well, it was actually a while ago. I think 2015, where I'd first come up with the idea. It was my first job supporting a multi-state employer. We hired our first employee in California, and the top of my head almost blew off at that point. California is so incredibly complicated, and
Yeah.
even just having that one employee makes a really massive difference as an HR professional. So I at the time had learned enough about technology to have a pretty good understanding of how we could deliver compliance information in an automated and real-time fashion. But I was also still relatively early on in my career, couldn't just quit my job and not pay myself for 2 years, had no clue how to even start a business. And so I just sat on the idea as a pipe dream for, 7 years. And
Wow.
eventually I had an opportunity to go work for a Series C startup and learn more about fundraising and what goes into building a company and scaling it and the metrics and who you'd want on your leadership team and all that. And I told the founders my idea, and they basically made me quit and became my first investors, which was really cool.
Wow. That's wow. That's really, really cool. So okay. So it's important to ask then, this is sort of a good lead up. What is Virgil HR? Kind of give us the story. Tell us what it is. What problems does it solve?
Yes. So I mentioned earlier that when you're complying with employment and labor laws, you're going on Google or you're talking to lawyers. It's very time consuming. There's a high risk for error. So, what we do is we have a variety of features within our product, and they're all there to automate the compliance process for you. So, we eliminate the need for you to have to do any research. We do that in a number of ways, but one is through our chatbot. So you can ask the chatbot a question. I have an employee in Massachusetts who's requested parental leave. What do I do? That took me 3 hours of research one time. And it will start asking diagnostic questions and does a legal analysis to determine what laws apply to John Doe. And after it's figured out what laws are applicable, it then tells HR, okay, here are all the things that you need to do to be compliant, all the forms, and we give you the forms, the notices, the third party state agencies you have to reach out to. So, what might have taken 3 hours of research and then you walking away not exactly knowing if you got everything right now
Mhm.
turns into 2 or 3 minutes with the bot with all of the collateral that you need to move forward, knowing that attorney has actually programmed that bot and created all of the content themselves. So there's a lot of really credible data in there. And we then started building out other features, an employee handbook builder, a multi state comparison tool, legal updates, a compliance calendar. I hated getting those emails. Well, it was great that I was getting those emails from SHRM that would tell me when a new law had passed. But keeping
Yeah.
up with all of that was crazy. I had an Excel sheet. I was trying to keep up with it by state. It just was not sustainable at all. So we manage all of that for you within our tool. And we even create tasks for you. So we have a task management feature. If the minimum wage increases in Tennessee and you need to provide a minimum wage poster to your Tennessee employees, we will create a task, notify you, and provide that poster so that you can then in turn send that off to your employees. So lots of really great stuff and a ton of features outside of what I just mentioned. But really, at the end of the day, it's to take away that headache that HR has and give them a sense of confidence in the decisions they're making.
That's incredible and a huge time saver.
Yes. Yes.
Huge time saver and probably money saver, right? I mean, I would imagine that there's so much of the compliance, has to go through a lot of legal hoops, and if you have that sort of already done for you. So tell me about the kinds of customers that come to Virgil HR, and we don't have to name any names here, but I'm kind of curious. Talk to me a little bit about what they look like. What are they trying to accomplish when they come to you? What are some of the biggest things that you see them looking to, resolve? What are the topics on their mind?
Yeah, well, as you can imagine, they're experiencing the same pain points I did. So they're looking for a solution that can address those pain points. We are typically selling to small and mid-sized companies. Usually 5,000 and under. We do have customers that are much larger than that. And it's interesting because some of the enterprise customers we have are using us because their internal legal team doesn't have the bandwidth to support them. So this is a way for them to get really quick information. In some cases, the legal team will use it as well internally. But I'd say for the most part, small and mid market, we cover pretty much every industry. There are some more dominant industries than others, like professional services, and then the more regulated areas like manufacturing and construction, for example, healthcare as well. Um, and the user is that day to day HR professional. I am surprised actually by how many VPs and CHROs are actively using the product on a pretty regular basis. But we generally see admins, managers, and directors that are in there using it pretty regularly. And we have a lot of really great case studies from our customers on the amount of time that the product has saved them, the amount of money. We had one just share with us that they'd saved about $125,000 in the last year using our product. And our product is a very affordable one to get. So that was really exciting.
That's amazing.
Right now, we serve the customers in the US, but we will be expanding internationally next year.
That's incredible. And so 5,000 and smaller as a general, as a general group is still pretty big. I mean, do you also serve the micro smalls, the 5 to 50, or do you find that most people generally in excess of a few hundred are the ones that are adopting it?
Yeah, I would actually say a majority of them are on the smaller side. So, one of our partners, Bamboo HR, for example, provides Virgil to all of their customers for free. I don't know what their exact demographics look like, but small business. So, we do have a lot of small business in there using it. I would say what we're typically seeing is, you know, 20, 25 employees, somebody who's kind of actively trying to handle this HR stuff. It might not be an HR professional, it might be a business owner or someone in operations, but that's generally when you tend to have a resource like that as you're growing. So, yeah, I mean, under 100 is very, very common. And I'd say percentage wise, it makes up about a third of our customers.
So, um, you know, compliance, I think, is really beyond important, right, for organizations when it comes to their people. Um, I'm curious, how many folks do you see, and I don't know what kind of analytics you're measuring on the backside, but I'm kind of curious what of the organizations that are using it, how many are really doing it right when it comes to compliance? How many are generally nailing it, and how many do you find really slipping up along the way?
Well, this might come off as disingenuous, but it really is the truth. When they're using our product, they're less likely to be out of compliance. I mean, if they're using any product like ours, they'd be less likely to be out of compliance, right? But I'd say that a majority of employers are probably out of compliance. It can be that they're not posting or providing the right labor law posters to their employees, which can be, uh, federal fines can be over $40,000 per incident. States can be several $1,000s per incident as well. So that gets to be really expensive, especially for small businesses.
Yeah.
But, look, like when you look at the EEOC, the number one reason why employers are getting sued is for harassment and discrimination. So I do think that there's a lack of understanding, especially by smaller business owners, but across the board, as to what constitutes harassment and discrimination, which sounds really maybe surprising, but there are some nuances to it that can just get really tricky. And that's when you'd want to get some type of legal resource involved. Accommodations is also an area that gets employers into quite a bit of trouble. And then things like wages, minimum wage, meal and rest break, final wages, leaves, for example, those can be extremely complicated and it's difficult to do right. So, unfortunately, it's a problem that everybody faces. And in some cases, and I'd say this is a lot of the time, they don't even know they're out of compliance in the first place. So, when you have about 10% of employers getting sued every year, that kind of just reflects, right, how incredibly difficult it is for these organizations to stay compliant.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it kind of begs the question, where is it that you feel that organizations are most likely to drop the ball when it comes to compliance? Like, are there certain areas where they struggle the most, that you find? I mean, you've brought up a couple of really interesting areas. Where are people mostly not figuring it out?
I would say those are the big areas where they're really struggling. So, there are easy things like, let's say minimum wage, right? Everybody knows what the federal minimum wage is. If you're in a certain state, you probably know what your state minimum wage is as well. But if you have an employee in Montgomery County, Maryland, do you know that the minimum wage is higher than the state's minimum wage and therefore supersedes the state law? So those little things can be missed. But yeah, accommodations, discrimination, harassment, things related to wages. I see a big area where employers get into a lot of trouble is misclassification. So, for those who don't know what misclassification is, it's when you essentially identify a role as exempt or non exempt of overtime and minimum wage requirements, or in some cases, employee versus contractor. And the employee versus contractor is where you get into a lot of trouble. And many people get it wrong because it's very complicated to do an audit for something like that. And we have an audit tool, but I would still recommend that an attorney take a look at the results of that audit tool. Or if you're not using a product like ours, just finding an attorney to do that for you because it's so sticky of a situation to get into. When you're held accountable to wage theft, it's things like maybe you're not paying them the minimum wage amount
Right.
you're supposed to, or it could be that you weren't paying them benefits, or their social security match, for example. So that can really add up over time. And I actually know of a small business, they had about 6 or 7 employees. So they were really small. They misclassified an employee as a contractor. She sued and they went out of business. So it can
Wow.
be a really big deal. And you want to make sure that you're on top of your classification audits for sure.
How do you decide on your on the platform? Obviously, you know, on the backside of you obviously are ingesting data and information from a variety of sources to make sure you can provide the most, accurate information to your customers. How do you decide what areas to lean into? Where to, I'm it's easy to say everything, right? Everybody should know everything about everything. Right? But, how do you decide where to do that? I mean, what's the feedback loop like with your customers? I'm curious.
Well, we started off first with leave because that's probably one of the most complicated experiences that HR or business owners have to go through with their employees. So our MVP, our minimum viable product, or like our beta, for example, was leave in California. Because if we could do leave in California, we could do anything. So we started off with leave and then took a look at the employee life cycle. Everything from the moment you conceptualize a role and have to do a classification audit, for example, all the way to post termination, like unemployment. And we started building out the product over the last 4 years to cover those topic areas across the board. What we don't cover is payroll tax. Payroll tax is extremely complicated, and there are already vendors out there that are doing it really well. So it didn't make sense for us to get into payroll tax. But the other areas now, over a period of time, we cover pretty extensively. And I'd argue that we're probably one of the more comprehensive vendors out there when it comes to how deep we go into some of these topics. But I believe we cover 47 different topic areas in the US, and that can range from workplace safety to leave to terminations to overtime and everything in between.
I'd imagine that compliance is a bigger challenge for some kind of businesses than others. I mean, thinking like manufacturing and construction, obviously there's a health and safety component to it, right? But then, there's probably others where that's not so significant. Um, I mean, can you think of, or can you give me some examples of some where, you find that there's a huge, discrepancy in maybe significance, right, of the compliance challenge between some businesses and others?
Yes, absolutely. I mentioned some of the more regulated industries
Mhm.
earlier, like manufacturing, construction, transportation is another really big one. Transportation gets into quite a bit of trouble for wage issues that come up. It does get complicated when truckers are constantly going through different state lines. Because the meal and rest break laws are different depending on the county or the city that they're passing through. It gets to be very
Interesting.
complicated. But they're also, in many cases, misclassifying truckers as contractors instead of employees. We saw a really big lawsuit several years ago with Swift Transportation. They had to pay $100 million because they misclassified their truckers.
Wow.
So it can get very, very expensive. You have other areas too, like healthcare, that does get to be pretty complicated as well. And I'd say any employer that's a multi state employer is going to have a lot of challenges no matter the industry they're in.
Wow. That's not that's definitely a non-zero, amount of money. So,
It's a lot.
um, I know for an organization that struggles with compliance, there could be a lot of confusion and lack of clarity around employment and labor law, which seems to be pretty common. Tell me, how can leaders get more clarity around what they should be doing, or where to even get started?
Mhm. Yes, well, I would absolutely recommend if an HR leader hasn't done this yet and doesn't do it at least once a year, that they complete an audit of their compliance processes and policies to ensure that they're being, yeah, fully compliant across the board. So, for example, within Virgil, we have a compliance audit tool. It's 50 questions. It covers every aspect of the employee life cycle, everything from are you storing your I-9 forms correctly to are you paying out final wages appropriately by state or locality.
Hmm.
And that gives our users a really great snapshot of where they are today and their gap areas. And then what we do in our report is we then provide recommended action items to mitigate those risks. So whether you were using us or you perhaps, I don't know of anyone off the top of my head who does something as comprehensive as that, but maybe engaging with an attorney in employment and labor law or a very senior HR consultant to do an audit for you is the best way to start to figure out what the health of your organization is. And then you can kind of build a plan from there.
That's great advice. I bet there's a lot of tools out there that can really benefit, HR folks. Do you feel like, and I feel like you're the perfect person to answer this question, given your experience both running and leading HR teams and also building tools that support them. You feel like most teams are you know tech ready, tech enabled, tech savvy?
No, not at all.
No, that's the shortest answer today. Yeah, no, I mean it's just I feel like a space that's moving so fast and it's kind of hard to keep track of. And when there's a new shiny tool out there, a month later there's 10 more, that can do so many things. So how do you begin to change the culture for HR teams when it comes to tech? How do they begin to make the shift?
Yeah, it's interesting because this is totally stereotyping because I know a lot of HR professionals who are very tech savvy.
Yeah.
But in general, HR typically is not tech ready. They're not tech literate. And so I was lucky because I've worked for technology companies. So I supported CTOs and CIOs who had technical teams and got to really understand what goes into the talent and what they do. But not everybody has that experience, and so I think it's really important to do a few things. The first is take a look at your organization, and based on your strategic objectives, identify what type of tech you need within your company. You'll also want to identify not just whether you're tech ready, but whether your organization, from a culture perspective, is change ready. So that's another really important piece. If they're not change ready, don't even bother. That's what you should work on first. But then once you've identified the need, you can go to market and start looking at these different products. And I would always recommend, no matter how proficient you are in technology, that you include your CTO in those discussions and CIO as well, because we want to make sure from a data security perspective, we're fully covered with the vendors that we're working with. So working with them is really critical. I would highly suggest that if this isn't happening yet, that you speak to your CTO or CIO and just get a more in-depth experience, kind of knowledge, I guess, of what they do, what their teams do, what skill sets are required. You could even go out and take, MOOCs have tons of free courses online to just educate yourself a little bit more. But the area that you'll really want to educate yourself on, of course, is AI. And AI is just kind of this like shiny, little thing out there that people are really excited about, but don't always understand the implications or the functionality behind it. And so that's why it's so important to bring someone from the data security side into it. Absolutely, because we're starting to see more and more companies getting into a little bit of trouble for things like algorithmic bias. So getting a better understanding of AI, and a good way to do that is to go to conferences. There's some really great conferences for HR professionals: Transform, SHRM, Unleash, all really great series that are covered throughout the webinar that touch on everything from giving yourself a little more technical knowledge of AI to how do you implement AI and everything in between. I could talk forever about this topic because I'm super passionate about it. So I'll kind of stop there and see if you have any follow
I
up questions to that.
I really I I like that. I love that. Yeah, I mean, in addition to those, there's disrupt HR, there's HR tech. They're all great. It's a great place to start. You made a really interesting comment that sort of stuck with me about if if your team if their culture is not change ready, then you can't even start. If
Mm-mm.
the culture isn't ready, like if that culture is not built to adapt to new changes, then everything else can't be done.
Yep.
And that I mean, I agree with it. But it really stuck with me, and it kind of begs the question, w- if you're if there's an HR leader or a team leader or CEO or whatever it is, you know, or even if it's a consultant who's come in to help an organization and has sort of identified all these gaps, or things that need to happen, and somebody's brought in as, like, let's say, a change agent. Where do they start to change that culture so that it is adaptable to change? How do you create that environment where they're ready to do all these things?
Yeah, it's a great question that I'm sure people get paid a lot of money to, answer and do. But I'll just say, based on my own personal experience, one of the best ways to start off is through these engagement initiatives that you have with your employees. So if you were to do, for example, pulse surveys or periodic engagement surveys with your employees, and then built out action plans and executed against them and showed them, hey, based on your feedback, I'm executing against what you've shared to make your life better here. when they start to see that, when they start to see that feedback that they've provided has resulted in really great change for them in the organization, that's where you start seeing an attitude shift and a cultural shift where they in turn become more change ready. Um, and so I think that that's huge. And it's also really important for leadership across the organization to be promoting change consistently. And when you do have initiatives that require some form of change management, that you're fully executing on the change management, structure when it
Yeah.
comes to a transformation project. If you're implementing a new software, let's say, and you have a terrible change management process, then people are going to be less likely to accept change in the future. So you have to be really careful with that.
And it sort of for me sort of begs this next question. I see and I fully understand this idea about change. What if I'm starting a company? What if I'm just now scaling my team and I know that these are future challenges that every organization has to deal with? What kind of things can I be doing as a leader to build this kind of culture that I know will be able to embrace that in the future?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that there are different types of change that you need to be prepared for. So let's use AI as an example. Everybody's really worried that AI is going to take their job. And
Mhm.
in many cases, it will. But there are a lot of new jobs that will surface as a result of AI. And there's some really cool stuff that I've kind of seen that's particularly interesting. So on the HR side, for example, a human AI kind of teaming manager where they're designing workflows where humans and AI systems cooperate efficiently, or you have this AI kind of interaction designer, which is another HR role that kind of evaluates how users interact with AI assistants. So there will be a lot of really great change, but you have to prepare your workforce for that change. So I'm not seeing this, but I am hearing it more, which is good. And that's the importance of upskilling your workforce. So it's really important to take a look at your workforce today and identify the roles that you think are going to be replaced by AI. And then take a look at the roles that could exist based on what your company might need in the future with the adoption of this AI technology to upskill your workforce and get them prepared for that change. So there are tons of ways that you can prepare your employees for change. That's just one of them. But that also gives them a lot of confidence in the organization. You'll see better retention, better engagement, and performance. So all around they're great initiatives.
That's a really insightful and observation. I think that 100% am behind that. I think that oftentimes what can paralyze some folks, some team members, right, or make them resistant to change is a lack of confidence in their ability uh, to go with that flow, right? To be able to adapt and then adopt, or maybe it's the other way around: adopt and then adapt to those changes, right? There's a changing um, there are changing needs, right, in this new world of work, right? We have to work with new tools, and when we get so experienced with some and we lose the hunger, I think, to learn more, I think that could probably lead to, I think, some resistance to change. So if you're upskilling folks and they're constantly learning new things, they're constantly gaining confidence with new technologies, new processes, and new systems, then when you introduce a new one, there isn't going to be fear that they can't, you know, adapt to it.
Right.
Um, Give me some predictions for the future when it comes to the culture for HR teams. What do you see creeping up? Is it are all these predictions AI, or do we have some others in there?
Well, I think as a result of two things, the first is AI, and the second is a more expansive global workforce that we're starting to see with all these EORs popping up,
Yeah.
for example. That an area that I predict will end up being pretty important and prevalent is cross-cultural emotional intelligence, because as these teams become global, they're more diverse, they're remote. And so leaders won't just need cultural awareness training, they'll need to really feel and adapt in real time to different ways people express respect or disagreement or enthusiasm or concern. So, as an example, knowing that silence in a meeting might signal disagreement in one culture but respect in another is something that people are going to have to become really skilled at. So that's my prediction. I think we're going to see more of that cross cultural emotional intelligence.
I like that. I think you're onto something there. With that in mind, give me some insights that maybe, um, tomorrow's leaders are going to have to develop in order to thrive in this sort of cross-cultural world that you've described.
Yeah, I think communication is going to be one of the most important skill sets for a leader to have. And not just communicating like I'm a really great orator, right? It's more, am I tailoring my message to my audience? So that is going to be really key. The other piece, yes, around emotional intelligence and having a strong foundation in emotional intelligence will also be really critical. And then there are some other aspects. I think that it will be really important for everybody to be more educated in technology. We can't have CHROs that are not tech savvy and tech ready with the change that's coming. So that will be really key too.
Any big changes you think in compliance in the world of human resources coming up here?
Yes, absolutely. So I'd mentioned earlier that we're starting to see a more global workforce, not just with big companies, but with really small companies too. And so compliance will become more complicated than ever, because you can imagine how complicated it is just to deal with federal, state, county, city laws in the US, making the US probably the most complicated country from an employment and labor law perspective. But now you're going to have to adhere to France's laws, which makes California look like Texas. Uh, Dutch, India, which is also very complicated as well, and the whole gamut. So that will increasingly become more and more challenging for HR professionals and business owners. And then we're also going to see not just those cultural differences, but the language differences as well.
Right.
And in some cases, language requirements from a compliance perspective. So, for example, in Quebec, you have to provide as an employer notices to your employees in English and in French. So what that might look like in other countries, I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in all of them, or really in most of them for that matter. But that's where I see things getting super complicated for people. So it will be really important to find the right resources to assist you, whether it's a global law firm that can help you out, or whether it's a piece of technology that can do that for you.
You mentioned that Virgil HR is, at some point in the future looking to go beyond the US borders. Are those things that you're working on now, so
Yes.
that you're prepared in the future, to sort of, expand where those boundaries are?
Yes, we're being very careful because there are some companies out there that have built really amazing products, but
Mm,
they're essentially pointing to certain websites and then scraping off those sites and using that data to train their AI model. And unfortunately, it leads to a lot of errors. And here's a perfect example. If we're going to England, right, and England is the next country that we're going to focus on,
okay.
um, we will need to know where every law is so that we can actually pull off these government websites. Well, when you look at California, California's sick leave law, do you know where it sits?
Where does this hit?
It sits under their Housing Act.
Oh, that's
How
peculiar.
would you know to go look for something like that, right? So the same can be said for moving into these other countries as well. We have to be 100% accurate from a compliance perspective. And so we're being very careful and thoughtful about the way that we do that and what data we're using.
I would imagine uh, just from a cursory sort of thought that maybe the employee, you originally talked when you conceived this idea and you started with leave in California and you eventually then had to sort of break it out and think about the entire employee life cycle. I would imagine that there are points in the life cycle that are different in some countries also. Some things, I mean, obviously there's first touch and there's exit, right? But maybe along the way, some countries do things differently that we simply wouldn't have a need to conceive of here. Is that the case, or am I way off?
Yeah, there are some things like I don't know this in great detail, but I know, for example, in France, you have to have like a physician available to your employees when they get hurt or something along those lines. But that physician is contracted by you. You're paying this person on a regular basis.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
it's a random fact that I have because I worked for an international company, but would we know to look for something like that?
Yeah.
That's the tricky part. That's why you're going to need in-country experts helping you as you build something like this out.
Yeah, and that's actually a great example. I had no idea that that was the case, and that's exactly what I was talking about. So with all these changes, how do you see your own work evolving over time?
You mean in terms of what Virgil's doing?
Yeah, in terms of what Virgil's doing or where your next challenge lies, either
Yeah,
way.
so I think that what we'll start seeing is more adoption of AI to automate tasks for our users. We'll see more of that. I think predictive risk is going to end up becoming more and more popular. And so, in the compliance space, you can imagine how
Mhm.
incredibly valuable something like that would be. So we'll definitely see technology in many ways shaping how we work, um, and how we build these products and how we engage with our users and get feedback from them and the like. So more to come there. 4 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to conceptualize what AI can do today. So
Yeah.
there's a lot to learn still.
Yeah, for us all. One thing I always like to wrap up and ask, I'm so curious, if an entrepreneur, if an HR leader, if another person, who's getting involved in this HR tech space, is asking you for, a piece of advice, some of the most important stuff that maybe you've learned, about managing people, about taking care of their workforce, maintaining compliance, or around all of these things, you only have a minute. You're on an elevator up to the top floor, and before they walk right out the door, what do you tell them?
Oof. Well, there are so many messages, whether I'm talking to an entrepreneur or an HR professional. I'd say if I was talking to an HR professional from a leadership perspective, one of the most important things that I would stress is to really orient yourself with change management. Change management, my master's is in change management, so I have a lot of familiarity, but unless you've gotten that education or you have played a role at an organization that focuses or touches on change management, most HR professionals don't have that experience. And it's going to become more and more critical as we continue to see AI adoption and technology implementations within organizations, big and small. So I would highly encourage HR professionals to seek out ways that they can learn more about change management and how to apply it at work.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jocelyn. I really appreciate you being here and all those insights.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
This was another installment of Mustard Hub Voices Behind the Build. Thank you for joining us. Please like and share this episode and subscribe while you're at it. Be sure to visit mustardhub.com to learn how we help companies become destinations for workplace happiness and turn culture into a competitive edge. And be sure to sign up to be one of the first to get started with Mustard Hub for free. Until next time, we'll see you soon.